So, as a brand owner, what do you look for when choosing a distributor partner for your business?
So I think one of the most important things is picking the right distributor and also picking the right brand for your distributorship, because it's like almost like how you choose your friends and like what is their vision on what your brand's going to look like. And so some of the pillars I look at is really defining your criteria. What do you want from that distributor? Do they understand their market? How big is their scope? You know, what is their reputation, the experience they have inside of the market? So you're really looking at all of these key things to see if it's the right partner, along with, you know, as you're looking for a partner, leveraging your professional networks.
Okay, super. Josko, we're going to throw that one to you next, because you've done both as well.
Sure.
So when, from your brand owner hat, what do you look for when choosing a partner?
So one of the main things is you make sure that they have the same value system as you. This is very important. Are they looking for short-term or long-term? I'm always looking for long-term. That makes the most sense out of anyone. And also, how strong is their distribution network? You obviously want someone with a very big distribution network. One of the disadvantages of that is they're going to know all about your business. They're going to know what your costs are. So the negotiation will be a little harder. But you want someone with obviously a big distribution network, and also what is their reputation in the market? Because there are some people that have big distribution networks, but maybe not so good in the market as far as their reputation.
Just picking up on that, one, how do you figure out the reputation? Because, you know, if you're sitting in, you know, the US, Europe, you know, and you've found a new partner in Asia, and you may not have anyone on the ground, how do you kind of figure out the reputational side? So Josko first, then.
Sure. So one of the things you might notice, if you come to an event like this 2 or 3 times, you're going to see the same people. As much as the industry is very big, it's actually quite small. So going to events like this, meeting people, if you go to maybe 5 or 10 events like this throughout the whole, you'll meet the industry. You'll know, because the big guys, they have reputations. So you ask around, really, and network.
Okay. Colleen, what's your take on that one?
You know, it's really the same thing. It's like asking around the network, even from your suppliers and even like PR agencies and, you know, local people within the market, because you really want to understand what their reputation looks like. And the key really is, does their brand philosophy align with your brand philosophy? So there's a lot of things that we look for based on what reputation looks like.
Okay. And then building on what Josko was just saying, that, you know, when you're looking for a partner, making sure they have a good distribution network. Following on from the session we just had, which is omni-channel. So obviously we're representing professional brands. In the traditional days or before e-commerce blew up, it was very much, okay, do they have a good professional distribution channel across the salons, across the spas? Today, that's, like the last panel saying, that's very different. You can't go out as a pure professional thing. So what's your take on when you're saying, do they have a good distribution network? How does that play out when you've also got the omni-channel era we live in today?
And so that's when it gets even more tricky, right? Because you're talking about omni-channel. So you want a distributor that can do business with retailers. And then that's really looking at that retailer's reputation as well. And how's that going to affect my 360 circle from the pro to digital to that, you know, the omni-channel retail. So, you know, understanding how that retailer's selling, what that retailer's reputation is. So I always say that when you have a distributor, you really need to partner together well and hold hands on that, because you have to make those decisions together.
Okay, and Josko, because I've seen, because I look after the India market, and I've seen many brands coming in and with the distributors, and they start slicing and dicing. So they're like, okay, this distributor is for professional. We've got, you know, e-commerce has gone huge as well in India, and they're like, okay, we're going to use someone else for retail, someone else for e-commerce, which you kind of think, okay, that's specialisms. Let's choose a specialist for each section. But then, because e-commerce is booming there as well, you suddenly start seeing the professional distributor getting unhappy. So what's your play on whether you slice and dice the distribution channel across or one that does all of it?
Sure. So, I mean, from a producer standpoint, you kind of want to be in control of that. So you might think, hey, I'll split it up. I actually don't like doing this. I'd rather control the market in a different way by having some kind of direct contact with the end user through email marketing, digital marketing, or something like this. Because as a producer, if you can do this, then you actually have a lot more leverage than the distributor. Because right now in the markets, as a producer, the distributor has a bigger advantage than you. He has more leverage, especially if it's a big distribution network. So you as a producer have to somehow figure out how to actually control the market. I don't like splitting it up because you're just going to be on the call. One guy's going to be complaining about the other guy's going to be complaining, where in fact you want to spend your time developing the market, not getting these guys to fight.
Okay, and we're going to flip that to the distributor's point of view. So Ankit, you're one of the largest distributors in India, been going nearly 20 years in that market. What's your viewpoint as a distributor when you're working with producers, manufacturers? What is it that you look for in that relationship?
Well, for me, the most important aspect is that what is the vision of the brand? I mean, I meet a lot of companies, especially when we come to trade shows like this and we interact with them. A lot of times, everybody wants to have a pin in India that, okay, I have in India, but not many of them are actually prepared to take what it takes to be successful in India. Because a lot of times what happens is, as we all know, that India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world right now. And with that tag, we are also a developing nation, which is developing very fast. But the thing is that it takes time for the trends to come there. India is a very, very price-sensitive market. And I have seen in all the successful brands, in all the successful relationships that have thrived in India, all of them have been willing to do and to go to an extra mile to customize their offering, because the need is different. The education level of the people working inside the salon is very different. So you need to have that eye that, okay, I want to be successful, but I would like to go there, study the market, meet some salon owners possibly, or figure out what the competition is doing, what the brands are doing, and then come to a conclusion rather than, hey, this is my product, this is the price, give it or take it, give me €1 million, and because you are 1.3, 1.4 billion people. It typically doesn't work like that. So vision is most important for me.
And then what does that look like? So we've all kind of mentioned we've got to have a vision alignment, but from your point of view, as a large distributor working, and now you have brands coming to you, many times over to enter the market. So what is it that you what does that mean in reality? Like, okay, they have to have a similar vision to what you have.
I think it's being open to listen, open to ideas, and also try and understand that, see, India, like in all the markets, there are already brands established in almost each segment. So it's important to know how strong is the story, what need will it solve, how will it be beneficial to ultimately the salon owner, because in most cases it has to go through that. We're talking about omni-channel here because that's an upcoming segment. But then, of course, the core is the salon. So we have to know how the things that... A lot of times we have to tweak the concept, tweak the SOPs to make them price sensitive, price friendly. Because the way the salons are scaling up in India, even their levels of costs, the way of what is the cost per product, what is the service prices. When it comes to service prices, there is a limitation already in the market that, okay, I cannot go higher than this. Since I cannot go higher than this, I cannot afford a product which is more expensive than this. So if he's not able to fit in, then I don't think so. Then it takes some time. Things do click. It doesn't mean that the market is closed. Something is very unique. If the story is amazing, or if there is something that no other brand is catering to, such things do happen. We have seen some brands coming out of nowhere and sweeping the market across the world. So that is possible, but in a lot of cases, it has to make sense, because when we, as a company, we deal with more than 20,000 salons there. And when we interact with them and we try and understanding their need, their requirements, their demands, we realize that it has to make commercial sense. It has to, it cannot be just giving them a product at a price and they say, okay, you charge less money, but you start a service. It usually doesn't work like that. So,
Claire, we're going to bring you in on this because obviously you're talking from the legal point of view, and you've seen how brands and distributors have a tricky relationship. So what we see traditionally at times is a brand could come in, especially when they have a short-term vision, right? Okay, what's your MOQ? What money are you going to, how many dollars are you going to deliver for me in year 1, year 2, year 3? The insecurity the distributor often has is, well, I'm building your brand in the market, but what happens when I've done that? And we've seen, kind of big corporate examples recently have been Dermalogica being acquired by Unilever, and then K18 just selling out recently. And I've seen my distributor friends in different markets thinking, oh my God, we weren't protected. Some of them were protected, some of them weren't, and they put a lot of effort in. So, and we've heard, in the morning we had David Lieber from Slow Aging talking about 40 years ago he put in place a 10-year contract, with Declure, which is unheard of today, let alone 40 years ago. So what kind of advice, are you giving to brands or challenges you're seeing on both sides of that relationship?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, I've got a bit of a croaky voice. I think the main thing I would say for both parties is to get advice on any contracts that you're entering into and make sure that you do put contracts in place, particularly if you're the distributor, making sure that this contract is binding on successes in title. So whoever acquires the brand, that contract is binding on them. So if you've got positive termination clauses for you, so they can't just suddenly give you 6 months notice and be gone, making sure that contract is binding. The other thing that is really important to think about when you're entering into these contracts is where the territory of the contract, like the jurisdiction. So, for example, for all of my clients, I would recommend your contract is governed by the laws of England and Wales. It's like the gold standard for contract law, but you might end up in a position where you've got a great contract, which means, this party might be in breach if they, terminate you. But actually, if you've got to then, bring this case in a, foreign jurisdiction, actually that could cause a lot more expense for you. So actually thinking about where your contracts are governed as well as the content of them is really important, I think.
Would that apply even to international distributors, you're saying? Like, so
yes.
if you're, like Ankit's, operating exclusively in the India market right now, but he's working with international brands from, across US, Europe. So you would say try and get it done in a...
So for me, it depends on, because you're obviously based in India, I would recommend you be wanting your contracts governed by Indian law, right? Because you'd be more comfortable because that's your home market. So I think that's where I'm trying to, put it, the brands could be quite bullish about if it's a US brand, they want it governed by US contract law, and no one wants to go to court in the US. It's horrendously expensive. I'm sure you can back me up on that. So I think, it works both ways. If you're the brand, you definitely want it governed by your own jurisdiction, but also if you're the distributor or the manufacturer, you actually want to think about, well, this is my home market, where are my laws more favourable to me?
And, as a brand, I've actually made this mistake in my past, is if you have, say you're based in the US like Amika is, and you're only using your template US contract agreement with your international partners, you can get yourself into some trouble if you decide you're going to exit the market, or maybe something's not going according to the relationship that you want. So the best piece of advice I have for anybody who's a brand in this room, regardless of what country that you live in, make sure that you check with local counsel in the country that you're doing a contract. So if I were going to have a contract with you, I would check with my legal team to check what are Indian laws like. So that way we're both protected.
Yeah, because you could put something in a contract which actually isn't enforceable in that jurisdiction. So yeah, that's a very good point. Whilst you want it governed by the laws that you're more familiar with, actually, you need to make sure that you aren't contravening any local laws by putting that in place.
To ask here that, as you said, that as a distributor, I would prefer to have a contract which is enforceable in India. Mm-hmm. But let's say as a Spanish brand or a UK brand or a US brand, you would prefer to have your contract based enforceable there. So how do we get out of this deadlock?
Well, that's a very good question. So it's often, usually the person in the stronger position wins, but sometimes I'll recommend you do a neutral jurisdiction. So actually, if you can't agree, I often use Germany or the Netherlands as a neutral jurisdiction if we can't decide between jurisdictions.
Did you want to add to that?
So I don't know how much it is. I know for Germany, if you're a German producer there and you have a distributor somewhere else, there's no way you're going to choose a jurisdiction that's not German. It's just not happening. You can have the biggest leverage. You can have promises of millions of dollars. But as far as for German companies, for other companies in Europe, I don't know. But as a producer, like you mentioned, you want to be where you're located, where you know the laws, where you might even have some leeway because of connections.
Okay. I mean, moving on to this whole kind of relationship between, this is also obviously like, I think a point that sometimes gets overlooked between the brand and the distributor, and you're so excited about distributors signing a new brand and like, oh, we've got a great brand entering our market. The brand's like, great, we have a great partner and in a new market, and you kind of overlook some of the kind of complexities of you've got to have a good contract in place. the negotiation is making sure both parties are happy. And but moving on to this whole relationship side, Josko, we'll start with you first. How have you seen, because each of you have been in the industry a while now, and you've seen, I think 20 years ago, there was far more power with the brand when they were discussing and negotiating with distributors across the world. I know just from the time I've been in the industry, I've seen that power base kind of sway back to distributors, and distributors in good markets have a fair base and fair power side to them. Like we had Duco in the last session, biggest in the Netherlands. Esskay is one of the biggest in India, and you see that relationship's changing. How have you seen that relationship between the brand and the distributor evolve, say, over the last decade or so?
So I did actually work with Duco. Tough negotiator, but very fair. Like you mentioned, because the distribution is more and more important, they do have more power and more negotiating leverage unless you as a brand have a very good marketing strategy and you're very popular. That's where you as a brand have leverage over them, because if you're popular enough where the people are asking for your products, then you can say, hey, I don't have to go with the biggest, I'm going to sell anyway. But distributors definitely have more power, especially if they're very strong. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, well, it's case by case. And well, if you're big enough, if you're an Olaplex, Moroccan, etc., you're big enough, you've got the power. But when you're not a brand that the consumer's demanding day in, day out, there's a bit more balance to the relationship.
I agree, but then we also have to go with the other panelist where he said, why are you unique, why are you better, or are you first in the market?
Yeah.
And, one of the things I've noticed over the last 10 years between the relationship between the distributor and the brand, it's like there's been this increase in collaboration together, right? And I'm a big, strong opinion that you know your market better than we know your market, right? And so this collaboration goes kind of across the board of sharing sales data. So to be successful, you have to have somebody who's going to share their data, what's happening, so we can see what the market trends are. You're going to have somebody who collaborates with you that's doing the PR, that's staying on your brand message. And just really transparent communication is one of the things I've really watched evolve between myself as a brand working with distributors. They truly want to be your partner in the brand. And when you've got the right distributor, it becomes their brand too, right? They protect your brand, they love your brand, they do the best they can for it.
How do you go about finding that kind of, how do you know when you've got the right distributor for, or partner, like we're saying now?
And so to find the right partner, it's like with any relationship. It doesn't happen easily. Sometimes it might take you a couple of years to negotiate with somebody to get to where you have to go. But it really just comes down to looking how they run their business model. And is that the way that you want them to run your business? Because essentially, I'm going to give you my baby, and you're going to take care of it when I'm not in the market. So how are they taking care of it? How are they respecting it? And so it's all a bunch of different aspects, where they show up in social media, how they show up in their sales team. So it's really a lot of fact-finding and really asking a lot of questions. And some questions are hard, and some questions are easy to ask.
You just mentioned this a couple of years, and we're at a trade show now, and when you go to any of the trade shows, especially the bigger ones, I often see brands, saying, hey, we've got a deck full of cards, so great, we've opened up 8 countries today and really excited. Distributors can come back and say, well, you've got all these brands, etc. And I've literally seen that, saying, at a trade show, saying, we've just opened up 8 markets, we're good to go, we've got orders coming through. That's literally same-day decision-making and you're talking about, it could take you up to a couple of years to do that kind of thinking.
So I really think it is where your brand is at today. So you either look at it from an opportunistic standpoint, where I'm going to be at this show and I'm going to open up 8 new countries today, or maybe you're more of a mature brand, like Amika is, where I can take my time and I can pick the right partners. So it's more strategic in the approach that you're doing. So I think as a brand, those are the 2 routes that you have, whether it's opportunistic or you're going to be strategic in what you're doing.
And then Ankit, how do you approach that? Because like Josko and Colleen were saying, sometimes, when you've got and you were saying, when there's a great brand in the market, we're chasing it, we want it fast, for our own home market. But, you go to many shows, you meet so many brands, they're coming to you. What's your thought process about how long it takes to think, right, this is the right brand for our company and for our market?
So, when the brand says that I've opened 8 countries today or 10 countries today, maybe they're referring to 8 leads. Or maybe by even saying this, sometimes it makes you feel good that, okay, I did something productive in the exhibition. But usually what I think is it easily spans, considering India is a very strongly protected, regulated market where you have to have a lot of regulatory things done. So I usually see that it takes 6 to 8 months for the brand and the distributor to understand if the need is being met, if the product that we are potentially going to launch meets the market requirements. This usually involves me as a distributor going to their headquarters to understanding how the company is, or them coming to India to study the market better, because unless we have agreement on certain level of product offering and the market challenges or understanding, the commercials will not ever make sense. And of course, the second phase of this, so it takes minimum 6 months, can go up to about a year. There are certain discussions that we've had that has spanned, like we've met in over different trade shows over the years. It takes sometimes 1.5 years also, just to come to the right agreement. Once the level is set, the agreement levels are sorted, then I think it usually takes about 6 odd months to get the paperwork done before you could finally launch a product in.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, at what stage would because we're talking about dating for like 6 months, 8 months, sometimes longer. So at what point does legal advice, legal consultants come in?
Well, I think, it's something that you need to be considering straight away. When you said about opening up 8 new markets, that sort of filled me with a little bit of horror, because it's, it's like, are they clear to use in these jurisdictions? Have they thought about whether they have the right to use there, do they even have a trademark there yet? Does someone else trade under the brand? Could you be sued for infringement? All of these questions are things that kind of, sometimes get lost in the excitement of doing a deal. And actually, you don't want to be in a position where you've agreed, you've made an agreement with someone that you're going to partner up with them, and then actually you can't use the brand there. And I think that's something from both sides. I mean, the brand owner needs to be thinking ahead, what markets are going to be suitable for me, and am I clear to use there, and have I got the protection in place? And the person who's doing the distribution should also be asking those questions. Do you have the right to use here? Have you done clearance searches? Will you indemnify me and provide me a warranty that if I get sued for infringement, that it's going to be you that's going to take that on? All of these questions. So there's a lot of thought, as you were saying, it's not a quick thing. The brand owner needs to be proactive in thinking where they're protecting their brand so that they have the right to use it there. And also, if they haven't, it's not a quick process in some of these countries. It can take up to 18 months, 2 years to get a trademark registration. Sometimes it can be quite quick. You can do it in 6 to 8 months. But it's not a quick process necessarily.
Yeah, no, we've seen that, I know in the India market where when I've gone to trade shows and, there's a great Spanish skin brand called Lakme who just can't enter India because we have a big salon chain owned by Unilever's called Lakme, and who have their own makeup products, and they definitely want to get in, but that's a market we just can't enter because of that trademark infringement.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing when you're picking your brand to start with that often gets forgotten about is actually, well, I'm in the UK now, or I'm starting in the US, or I'm starting in Spain. Actually, where do you want to go? Because you don't want to be in a position where you either can't be in that market or you have to repackage your product under a different brand. And you were talking about reputation earlier. That's a big thing in trademarks. You want the consistency of your brand. You want it to always look the same. You want to, be able to build that reputation in it. And if you're trading in different territories under different marks, that's really hard to do.
Just before we jump to Colleen on that, whose responsibility is it? Because also we look at, a brand, will look after the home markets first. Ankit's, you've got distributors looking after their own market. Whose responsibility is it to say, right, we're going to look at the trademark IP side, and then who ultimately should own those rights?
So it should be the trademark owner for both, in my opinion. So it should be, because as you're the custodian of it's your brand, you should be wanting to look after it, protect it, and have the control. Some companies will let their licensees or distributors register the trademarks for them. I personally wouldn't advise that. You want the IP wholly owned by, one global entity who owns it everywhere. And you want to be making sure that you've got the right protection in place, that it's looked after properly, and that when you're entering these agreements, or if you're entering in license agreements, you've got it built in about quality control, checks, all of those kind of things, the right level of ingredients, because that can damage the brand if it isn't actually on message with what your original thought process was for it.
Colleen?
And I was just going to add on too, like it's very exciting when like you go to a show or you meet somebody and they want your brand, because all you want is the W in your column. You want to win, and you want to go back and be like, I did this and I opened this company. And I always think back to like the advice that, well, not even advice. My father would say this every single time my sister and I would walk out the door. Think about your future. Because every decision you make today is going to affect something that happens tomorrow. And it really does fall into line with thinking about your distribution strategy. Because you will get excited because you have people who want your brand because your brand is cool. And you have to think, if I open distributor A today or retailer B now, what will that do for my future choices, right? Because you could make a mistake and open the wrong distributor, the wrong area, the wrong territory, which will then prevent you from growing. So what I would encourage everybody to do is think about what's my 3, 5, 10, 12-year strategy as a brand, and where do you want to go? Put that as your North Star, and don't come off of your North Star. Don't let the noise and people who want you that you don't, it's not part of your strategy, don't let them on your train with you.
How is that thinking about, because I know where you are today as, representing, Amika and their kind of global export strategy, will be very different today to what it was when they first formed. So how has that thinking evolved? Because I think, it's not, we were saying like a binary thing. It's part of the value, it's part of how the life cycle of the brand evolves, and that thinking evolves about export strategy. So how has that evolved from what it was at the beginning to what it is today?
And I could be honest with that. So Amika has been around for 20 years. And so 15 years ago is when Amika started developing a wet line. And it was a little bit more opportunistic at that time, where like distributors wanted you and you wanted to have as many as you could to scale your brand where you have to go. But once you get to where you're leveling out at, then you can step back and say, okay, here's my strategy. I need to exit certain markets. I need to have proof of concepts in different countries to grow the brand. So it becomes like, it's almost this mature brand starting to make a decision.
Josko, I want to ask you, because you do represent distributor and brand as well at the same time, what are some of the red flags as a brand first that you look at when you're, when you've got distributors, because you'll have lots of distributors coming up to you, at different parts of your journey. What are the red flags you see when distributors come chasing and they have, and sometimes you'll say, go put a business plan together. They send you a nice business plan, great Excel sheet, good modelling. But what are the red flags you see when choosing a distributor partner?
So currently, because I'm in the business of lasers, which is more expensive products, if in the first 5-10 minutes they're asking about pricing, it's just not the distributor I want to talk to, because if price is the most important thing to them, it's not someone I want to do business with. It's important, but not when we're getting to know each other and make sure that the values are the same. This is like the most important. Also, I look at past success. This is very important. So if someone's had previous success, most likely they're going to have future success. So if it's a new distributor that is maybe not in that industry, and they're really enthusiastic, and I feel like it's going to be a good fit, I want to make sure they've been successful in something previously. So that's not a red flag. That would be a green flag, right? The price thing, because I've had this experience so many times where, we talk about, what's the price of this? What's the price of this? Brother, are we going to talk about something else besides price? Like where the value proposition is, what's your distribution, and so on.
And have you got a kind of checklist that you have, like mental checklist or actual physical checklist when you're...
Yeah. So there's a few things, the distribution network, where I'm talking about like devices, what their trainers are like, what their sales team, how big is the sales team, how many trainers they have. I definitely have a checklist that's, when someone sends me an inquiry, I send them a checklist about 10 questions, and that's my first filter, because 90% of people won't reply to that. So I don't know what kind of distribution they're thinking they're doing without any kind of planning, but there's definitely a checklist, and if you really want to know the secret, it's called ChatGPT. Put it in there, ask for a checklist, and they'll give you a checklist, and then you decide what is important to you from there. With business plans, also, it's very tricky just to go on that, because someone will give you a beautiful business plan, but look, if you go to ChatGPT, they'll give you a beautiful business plan. That's why, if it's very generic, I can't really trust it, and I'm looking at previous success.
Colleen, do you want to add to that in terms of checklist and red flags with distributors.
So when I think about red flags, and it could depend on what you're talking about red flag-wise, but one of the things going to what you're saying is, I'll ask a potential distributor to create a waterfall for me. What is the brand going to look like in your market in 1, 2, 3, and 4 years? Really building out the number of salons, and how much the salons are buying, and what your sell-through number is. And I'm more focused on what your sell-through number is in the market than what you're actually buying from me. So that's where I really track what looks like in the market. So when I get a waterfall that seems unrealistic, that sends off my first red flag. Like, where is this product going to go? You want to make sure that you're making sure your product's not going to go on the gray market. It's going to go somewhere that it's not supposed to. So that's my first one I watch. And then my second red flag that I always pay attention to, and distributors, you guys are funny. And so I always say they either take your brand for offense or defensive reasons. Have you guys heard that before? And so sometimes someone will take your brand because they don't want anybody else to have it, and they want to shut it down in the market. Or they'll take your brand because, you've got a lot of leads and I can put my other brands in there. So really asking your distributors during this dating process, I call, the right questions, like understanding why they want your brand in the market. And so what are the purposes they're putting in the market?
I'm sure you've had examples of many bad dates on this journey. Ankit, from the other side, what are the red flags that you see when you're talking to brands? When one, you could be going out searching for brands to bring to market. Or two, given you're one of the biggest, that you'll also have brands now saying, "Hey, we want to enter India, we want to work with you." So, but what are the kind of red flags that come up?
Well, for me, typically the first red flag is that once the presentation is done, once they have introduced their brand or their products, or we've had a very basic level of interaction, like Josko was saying about prices. It's the other end, okay, year 1, what's your number? Year 2, what do you know? I think 50% is justified. It's not too much. Year 3, this much. So the moment you start putting numbers, imaginary numbers on a piece of paper, of course, during the dating process, if you agree upon something, you need to have some number as a benchmark to understand whether the plan was successful or not. But if the number game starts much before you have understood the market, then of course that's a red flag. Because in that case, you just focused on just putting a number in India, but not really concerned of where the product is going to go or what problem is going to solve. So that's the number one red flag that we look at. The second thing that we look at is that on in which markets has the brand got success? Whether it's in their home market, because of course there are a lot of companies who are very popular or very successful in their domestic markets, but do they have the capability or the orientation to go international? So a lot of times they say, okay, yeah, I'm successful in one market, but I have 40 distributors or 20 distributors. But then when you ask them some questions, okay, which is the best outside your home country or which is the best, then you get mixed kind of responses. So it means that, okay, because when you come to a trade fair, people are coming from all the countries to get business. So you will eventually find a distributor, that's not a problem. But the important thing is that whether you have the right mindset to do it. Another thing that I always look at is that whether you are just product obsessed or you have the capability to give some solutions to the problems, because not all the markets work the same way. So we have brands, I mean the ones that are successful, some of them that have been very successful in India is they have optimized their product offering, they have changed their SOPs, just to make the products more lucrative for the market, or maybe to reduce price. We have changed how it's usually done in some countries to another countries. So whether or not the manufacturer is flexible to make those changes, because not everything works the same way. Another thing is whether, and to be flexible, honestly, you have to produce. And nowadays, a lot of brands are now brands because they don't produce by themselves, and they're doing third-party manufacturing. So when you have your own factory, when you have your own production, or you have a good intent also, then flexibility automatically comes. So that's another thing that I always look at. And the fourth thing is, if you are willing to open the market, are you willing to come to the market and understand? If the trust is not established, if you're just not sure whether you want to open India, I mean, I have met brands, we have very good meetings in the trade fair, but then nothing happens after that. we meet again in the next trade fair in some other continent or the next year. So a lot of times the intent to launch is also sometimes not there. So it just keeps on and on.
If you've got any questions, feel free to put up hands to ask questions as we're going. Claire, I've got to throw one back to you, because in terms of, like, I was giving the examples of like Dermalogica going to Unilever, K18, P&G recently. What advice would you give to the distributor? I mean, we've mentioned some of the kind of clause you can put in, but I remember, because I've got friends who represent K18 in different markets, and some of them are squirmy. I mean, Rabi, who was speaking before, I actually asked him this question 2 weeks ago about, because they represent K18, and they said, we just managed to get a contract after 2 years with them, just in time. Mm-hmm. It's an omni-channel contract as well, so they're very looked after. They just launched them into Sephora in Dubai, and so they were in a very strong position going into that sale, but many distributors of K18 would not have been. So and like Josko was saying, that when you're a strong brand, you can do what you want, right? So what advice would you give to distributors, especially when they get swayed by the kind of in brands at the moment?
Yeah, and I think, I think that's the issue is, who is in the stronger position where you're at the point where you're negotiating. And I think, sometimes the brand is on the back foot if the distributor is strong in the territory, but sometimes, it does work the other way around, and the brands, they have set stipulations. These are the contracts that we're going to be, wanting you to sign, and actually there's very little flexibility on them. I think, as I was kind of touching on earlier, it's really just making sure it's thinking further ahead. So it's not just about what you're getting now, but actually how long that relationship's going to potentially last, how you can future-proof that, whether you can, whether there's, if you want to get, because there may be a reason actually, if the brand has been bought by someone else, you don't want to be their distributor anymore. It might not sit with your ideals, or the way they do business is not how you want to work. So I think just trying to think ahead about what, worst case scenario could happen, and actually how you can either extricate yourself or bed yourself in if the brand, is transferred to someone else.
Right, and then building on to that, I think Josko mentioned the point about, and in the last session as well, you've got, especially when brands get big, you've got the issues of grey market, counterfeiting, all that happening, and that's a growing problem in the market today. And because of social media, we all know about it, and we see it all the time. So whose responsibility is that, and what advice can you give to both sides of the equation?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, again, the responsibility lies with the brand owner, but actually as a distributor, if you're seeing that there is counterfeit product out there, let the brand owner know, because it's going to affect your sales as well as theirs. From my perspective, the key thing, particularly with cosmetics, is making sure that the brand owner has got customs watches, making sure that you've got good relationship with trading standards, or the equivalent in whatever territory, so they know what to expect, what is genuine product coming in, what isn't. We also do a lot of online brand enforcement and marketplace watches, so we have very sophisticated software that will pick up counterfeit products, it will pick up copyrighted images, all of those kind of things, get listings taken down automatically off the various platforms. One thing that we've noticed sort of particularly coming into Europe through Poland, there's a lot of Chinese counterfeit product coming in through there. We did quite a few raids with local council there a few weeks ago. And also, whilst the brand owner is thinking about putting their own customs watches on, you also need to be careful, particularly if you're manufacturing in places like China. Exporting, your product can be stopped coming out of China into Europe if there's a brand owner in China who owns that brand. So I've got issues with a couple of bigger brands that I work with, where someone locally has registered the trademark and they now can't manufacture their products in China because they can't get them out, because it will fall foul of this party's customs watch. So there's lots of things to think about around that topic, but as the brand owner, I would say it's ultimately their responsibility to be making sure they've got the right watches in place.
And so I agree with you, Claire. So ultimately, it's the brand's responsibility that it's not going to grey market. So having a strong brand protection program, whatever that looks like for your company, is super important. But it's also, some of that ownership does belong on the distributor as well, because the product's coming from their warehouse. So they're making the decision if they're going to ship it somewhere, if there's unusual requests for the product. You know, it's a nail salon's asking for like 15 cases of shampoo is probably a red flag for somebody, but a lot of distributors will ignore it, right? And so as a brand, you also have to be very data-driven with your partners. And I had said earlier, the number I care about is what your sales out are in the market. I don't really care as much of what you're buying from me. I want to know where it's going in the market. And so a lot of times a brand makes a very grave error because they're trying to achieve their number for the year. Or their board says, like, you got to hit this number. And they just push and push and push the product on their distributors. And then they get surprised when it turns up in gray market. So really making sure that you have a transparent, good relationship with your distributor partners where they can be comfortable and say, Colleen, I don't think I'm going to make my number this year, and these are the factors happening. What can you do to help me? And also paying attention to like the data that's coming back from the distributors, because I know a lot of times, and if you're a distributor in the room, you probably have had this work. I don't want to tell the brand how many salons I have. I don't want to give them the name of the salons because they'll steal them from me. We actually don't want your salons. We just want to make sure it's going to salons.
I've also had similar experiences. We were talking about counterfeiting, etc. For a couple of brands which have been very popular in the market. We have seen copy of that coming from China, producing in India. So in this case, we took the power of attorney from the brand and we hired a local law firm. And since it's not possible for the international company to sign all the paperwork on that, we are following a very strong regime of protecting the brand in the market. We tied up with a local IP law firm, and we have done high court cases for people who have deceptively similar trademark, trying to create confusion in the market. So I believe that once the brand is registered, then it's also the responsibility of the distributor to protect and monitor the brand, because sometimes you're sitting in another country, it's not possible to know of what's happening in your market. So, and then of course, I believe that till the registration of the brand, it should be the responsibility of the brand owner to get the trademark cleared. Post that, then as a distributor, we offer services to the brand to make sure that the trademark is well looked after and intervene, and sometimes even if we have to spend some money from our pocket to make sure that the counterfeit is away, it's fine, because ultimately the relationship has to be win-win. And it should be based on trust and relationship. Like Colleen said, that the distributor is not willing to share the data, because if the trust is missing in the relationship, then I don't think so it's worthwhile to invest time and money in either of such a relationship. So.
Yeah, I guess that's a big red flag. Like if you can't trust each other on some of that important stuff, that's an issue.
I have a question. Who paid for the legal fees?
Well, sometimes we have to pay it, just to get the things rolling, because sometimes you have to do a very urgent action and a lot of times you're not able to communicate. So a lot of that, and then there's an understanding that sometimes we split it, or sometimes they pay it, sometimes I have to pay it. If it's in the long run, it doesn't matter.
Good. Any questions before we wrap up? Right. As we summarize, we'll go this way across from Josko to here. Couple of points. What we've been talking about, like we're not in the dating game, so it is all about a marriage and it's a long-term partnership. I remember, talking to Josko and Colleen offline before, and they say when they're getting into partnerships, while at the beginning it's looking like you look at a 1-year contract, maybe 2-year contract loaded with KPIs. If you're delivering in the relationship, then you say you look at slightly longer, 4 years, 5 years, slightly longer, because the relationship's working, but still KPI driven. Because you're not looking at it as a mature brand, you're not looking in the short term, kind of like you said, number driven game. What are some of the kind of tips and what you've learned over the years, the ingredients of making a good partnership between the brand and the distributor?
So open communication. You have to really sit down, and if it's a new market, and if you're starting out in a new market, I would choose, if you have proof of concept in your market, choose a bigger market. Little markets, eventually they'll come to you. But definitely sit down, make a strategy. I always do first year as a 1-year contract. And I'm not, okay, the sales are important, but more important for me is the sales process, and are they really doing everything that they can? Look, sometimes they'll do everything, and you get corona, you get a war, you get upheaval, whatever, and it happens. But within the first year, you'll already know, hey, this is the guy for me, or this is not the distributor for me. So first year, and if they're hitting their KPIs, if it's a person you're going to want to hang out with, yeah, I would extend it for a year or 2 or 3. But like I said, the sales are important, but I want to make sure that the sales process is really streamlined, where, hey, look, if it just didn't happen with this kind of marketing campaign, it'll happen with another one, as long as that sales process is right. Can I just ask a question? How many people here are producers? Raise your hand. Higher? Distributors? Okay.
Claire, from your experiences working with brands and distributors, any kind of tips you would give of making sure that partnership works?
Yes, I think the key thing, like what you were saying earlier, is trust, and it's building that trust between the two of you. And, both of you just making sure you get good advice on entering into any agreements. And you say you don't, as you were saying, you only want an initial, perhaps shorter period. But actually, as time goes on, you may trust that, to move that relationship forward. But I think getting advice, and for the brand owners, just make sure you plan ahead, think about where your markets are, and getting in there so it makes the process much easier when you get there, so you don't have to do a lot of corrective work to be able to get your brand out there.
Okay.
So I think the most important thing is collaboration. So that's going to go across the board for everything, from the purchases that you have to what's happening marketing in the field, PR, to social media. So you've got to make sure that you've picked somebody, whether it's a distributor or your brand, that you can feel comfortable that you're able to collaborate together so that you are set up for success.
I think for me, we have to take it as a very strong and a very close partnership. It's a partnership where one of the side cannot always win. There is always open communication is important. A lot of times you have to be very patient, because sometimes your market is demanding an urgent action, but maybe the other side is not prepared to answer that or do that. So it's about putting your point, but then not getting too much into that unless if you don't agree with it, then it's not going to work. So it's about respecting, because we're talking at 2 different cultures, 2 different countries, 2 different ways of business. A lot of countries, you have to take an appointment before you can talk to somebody or call somebody, whereas sometimes in our market, people can just call you anytime, whether it's a Sunday or a Monday. It doesn't matter whether it's 9 p.m. or 9 a.m., so 8 a.m. So it's about, if you're able to communicate, that's the best forward. Communication is strong, trust is there, relationship is strong, and you have to give time and patience, and most important, respect to each other, because I'm sure with that thing done, you will have a lasting relationship that can last for decades.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank.
So hi, I have been a distributor, and I have also been international sales director, so I know both sides. And what's funny, I listened to you all, and everything of it, most of us said what you said, I agree. But you never talked about forecast. And as I was a distributor, and it was a long time ago, they squeezed me with forecast, and I had to assign forecast and to give some numbers, and I thought I have to do it. So I did it, and it squeezed me, and that was it. And afterward, I was international sales director, so I was in another situation. Josko and I, we know each other, and having boss want you to get forecasts from your new distributors. So I would like to know from your side, how do you deal with it, you as a distributor, you as a brand, because it's something that I still think is very difficult when you open a new market and you want figures, and actually it's very difficult it's like looking, in a glass, I don't know you say it, in a glass bowl, and just thinking, okay, you can make a business plan, you can put some figures in a contract, but a lot of things can happen. and you need to have a feeling for the brand, but you're not sure about it. So how are you doing? I would like to know it from all of you, actually.
You know what? You're speaking my language. Any distributor has like another forecast. And so, a forecast, and I always tell distributors, a forecast is not a commitment to buy. A forecast is putting my manufacturing partners in the right place, right? So, for example, my brand, I'm the #1 selling dry shampoo in North America. And I have to make sure I have all the cans, the components, everything that's needed. So if somebody's doing an amazing job that wasn't forecasted for, you can't always affect production to move things faster, and that will put all of your customers out of stock. So from a brand's perspective, that helps us buy the raw materials. It helps us get the cans, but all the things are in line for production so that we don't get into a situation where we become out of stock. And as you all well know, coming out of being post-pandemic, it's taken a long time for supply chains to sort of shake themselves out. So now more than ever, forecasts were super important. So I think to answer your question, forecasts are important. Don't get sucked into I'm going to have to buy what I forecasted. As a brand, we just need to have an idea of where we're going.
So I agree. Once the brand is established, then forecasts are required for production purposes, for planning purposes, and we do provide forecasts for brands that are already very well established. We know that, okay, we need so much in X month, Y month, and we do give forecasts. The challenge is when the brand is new or you don't know how much, So typically how we take this is that we tell them, okay, in order to achieve this number, we would plan to do maybe 3 orders or 4 orders or 5 orders depending on the value or the logistics part of it. But then again, these are very, very tentative. We have to understand, in case if I'm not able to do that, we should first understand why, where is the problem. A lot of times the problem can be whether it was the intent of the distributor or it was market linked. So that is the most important thing. That I feel that if it is market linked, it's very important to understand what's not working, what's the challenge. Let's address that rather than just being focused on numbers. So we give forecasts because without that it's very difficult to run a business, especially when it comes to production and planning. But then yes, as Colleen said, these are just an idea to have an understanding of how things shape up.
Basically, everything you guys said stands. If it's the most difficult part is if it's a new market, right? If you're opening a new distributor, you're not really sure. So you really sit down with the distributor. You talk about, we try to plan the whole year ahead. I know it's kind of impossible, but you do it. You sit, okay, these are the activities I'm going to do. This is what we expect. And always, do a really conservative number, especially in the beginning. But you definitely have to sit with the distributor. The distributor and the brand have to sit together and see what actually are they going to do in the market. And then statistically see, okay, if we do this event, we expect this much. If we do this, we do this. And then you can update it quarterly, or I do it every 6 months. But it's definitely, from a producer standpoint, you need a forecast for it because otherwise you just, the supply chain cycle, some places 6 weeks, some places it's 3 months. It really, depends. So you want to be ready.
Yeah, super. We're going to wrap up there. I think it goes back to basically it's a question of trust as well. So if you've got the right long-term intent, it's trust. You do forecast for your own business, so you've got to treat each other as an extension of each other's businesses. I want to thank you, everyone, for a great session, a great way to wrap up day one.